Hello and welcome to a little video doing an explanation of the prototypes that I provided for the project Allan and Ace Detective Duo. Apologies if I sound quiet, I'm currently dealing with a throat infection, but hopefully it will come out clearer in the recording. So the first part of the prototype is the interactive screenplays that are currently up on screen. There are two screenplays, one for each of the playable characters which will be in the game and that have been outlined in the designs. So just to give a quick rundown over how these work, they behave very much like a choose your own adventure book where links within the document allow you to travel to different parts of the document and discover more about the story and the narrative and provide a very basic implementation of what a visual novel would ultimately be. So if we look in the left hand side of the screen, we'll go through a little bit of the introduction for Allan when you start up the game playing as this character. You'll see that there are a couple of options when you get to the bottom of the opening dialogue. Depending on what stage of the game you are in as the player, you'll be given up to 4 options to pick from. These have been highlighted in the island key table. So all island keys that begin with a prefix of A are relating to a action in the game which would be allowing you to move to a location. B is for choosing to investigate a scene. C is for talking to NPC characters within the scene that you're in. And D is for presenting evidence or clues that you have gathered to an NPC if you're trying to gather more information from them when they're being reluctant or unhelpful. So if we go back here, we'll see that at the beginning we only have 2 options. One is to move to somewhere and the other is to investigate the current scene we're in. If we go ahead and click on the link, it'll take us to a different part of the document, and from this page this will act kind of how it would be in the final prototype, where the background image would be fully available to view in the screen, and depending on where you click on the image, if you click on a clickable part of the scene, you'll be taken to some different outcomes. So if we were to potentially click on the red building, which would be the first option here, we then get a little bit of dialogue from the main character about the building, and then we can go back to it. It also tells us in the document where we're coming from as well, which is typically going to be the same as the final choice, which is essentially the equivalent of going back. Typically when you're going to a new location using the move to option, you're normally going to be progressing the story forward. So as we go into the inside of the building, we end up progressing the story by meeting a new character and gaining more context for the world that we are currently in. Within the document as well, there are some checkpoint markers which are going to be echoed within the prototype. So when you reach these points, when you have these 2 options, you'll ultimately either be coming back to this checkpoint or be progressing forward from this checkpoint. So at this particular one, for example, if we hit no, it will take us to a little bit of dialogue and then force us to go back until we choose yes. And then when we choose yes, we then carry on with the story and it progresses forward. And you can see here that at this point, some more options have appeared for us. So we now have the ability to talk to someone, and we have the ability to present some clues or evidence that we have gathered. You'll see that sometimes that the scenes will have transition notes, which are typically explaining how small parts of the game would function, such as transitions between locations or how gameplay mechanics would work and when they would be available. So here we're saying that a couple of options are disabled until we've talked to this character, Officer Biggins, and after we've talked to him, Specifically, when we've talked to him about getting set up, we'll see that we are presented with a couple of items that will then be part of our inventory. So if we go back to this point, we can then present these items, depending which one we want to do, to the character, which is the officer who's just given them to us, and he will be a bit puzzled as to why we're presenting the stuff we've just been given by him. But this is how the system would generally work. So now that we have these items, we would be able to move to the next location. We can also have a look inside the police station should we want to, but it's not necessary. But this will be down to the player to explore these various options to find out if there's anything important hidden within either talking to characters or within the scene that they're currently in. Then we can move to the outside, progress the story further now that we have our items. And you also see that under these headings, there's a small summary explaining what the location is we're in, whether it's inside or outside, the date and time, and then just a little bit of context for what's going on. And then we get to the end, which ends in the onboarding sequence, which is when gameplay is introduced between the two players and they're being taught how to play together. If we look in the other interactive screenplay for the dog, we'll see that most of it is more or less the same. There are certain things that are different because the perspective is different. So, for example, similar options at the beginning. We can move to the inside, keep going. And this character will meet a NPC here, a different NPC that the character from the first screenplay wouldn't have met until the end, just before the onboarding sequence. And you'll see here that there isn't an option to present anything because, as explained here in the transition notes, nothing has been discovered yet which our dog character could present to an NPC. So right now the only options are to move to somewhere else, investigate the scene, or talk to the character, but the move to option will only become apparent after we've talked to the character extensively enough. So if we go here, there's 4 options. Once all 4 options have been read, the ability to move to the next area would unlock. And more or less would be the same ending as the first screenplay. It's just slightly different from a slightly different perspective. So for example, in the first screenplay as a human, you see that the dog barks and it just says woof, but for the dog you'll see that it says it's barking and the dog is saying hello, because we can understand animals from the animal's perspective. So these are the first part of the prototype. The second part, which is a more playable version as opposed to just an interactive screenplay, is provided as a link. So when activating the link, you'll either be able to see the design scene, which is this, or you'll see the play scene, which will be like this. In the design scene, there's 3 boards. The first board is a choose your character screen, and then the other 2 boards represent the pathways for either the human character Allan or the dog character Ace, depending on who you've chosen. And by the end, you'll be able to return to the main screen to play as the other character and get the other perspective. So if we go ahead and play it, it's a very minimal version of what a visual novel is. So there's more images this time. We have interactive buttons just like in the screenplay. So if we choose to play as Ace, for example, we get a little bit more interesting visuals for the text. So carry on going. The image appears, so we don't have to go to a different part of the document to see it each time. And we can choose to have a look around outside if we want. Similar sort of principle to the prototype screenplays. If you were to click on an object in the scene, if it was clickable, then it would lead to one of these options triggering. So if we click on the building, similar thing happens, but we get the text with the image. in a nicer looking space. Then we can move inside. More dialogue appears. We've moved to the outside area to meet the NPC dog Hunter. He says to ask him anything while we wait. So because we are waiting to have the human player reach a particular point, and we're waiting for the player controlling Ace to talk to Hunter about all the options, all we can do is either have a look at the area we're currently in and click on the scenery, or we can talk to Hunter. So when we've talked to Hunter through all 4 of these options, we'll then be able to progress to the next bit. So if we have a look, so here talk about Hunter, we ask about the human partners that Ace would be working with, asking about one of the NPCs, and then just to confirm it. So right now we can see that there's still 2 options, but if we go into the building, return and go back, we now see that there's the option to go to the next bit. So this would transition automatically in a more advanced prototype. It wouldn't be a button like this, but in the interests of this particular prototype, it's a button that becomes apparent after exhausting all the dialogue options. So if we go to the next, we'll see that the story progresses. See another character appears at the bottom of the screen. Excuse me. Then we see another man, which is the other player's character, the cooperative partner's character appears in the scene. And then we reach the end of the demo. It just says thank you for playing, and then takes you to the beginning. And then you can play as Allan and get his perspective on the game. So if we move forward to a similar point where we are given a choice, we can hit no, a bit of dialogue appears, we go back, and we'd be stuck in this loop until we hit yes, and then it'll advance the story. And then we keep going. A similar thing to what we had just now with Ace, we have to talk to the officer about a specific topic. In this case it'd be setting me up. So just to check, if we go into a different topic, and then go back, and then go back again, we still see we only have 2 options. But if we go into setting me up, where we will see our items, we then go back, back again, and then we see we can either move to the outside area, which would progress the story, or we can present the items we've just received to the character. And here they are, detective's badge and whistle. It just pops up dialogue for both of them. Then we can go back, and we can carry on with the story. And because it's a linear story, we aren't able to go back, so the text that appears will not appear like this in the more advanced prototype. It would be appearing, excuse me, it would appear with the character's name and with perhaps 1 or 2 lines of the text at a time, which has been visually conveyed within the mock-ups that can be found within the game design document. And then here we reach the end of Allan's demo. It says thank you for journeying with us, and then we return to the choose your own adventure screen. The choose your character screen. And that concludes the current prototype. So thank you for listening.